I'm Connor Old and welcome to another episode of Masters of Controlled Chaos. And today we're going to be looking at the master of parody, the director of Young Frankenstein, of Blazing Saddles, and of Spaceballs. He is none other than Mel Brooks. Welcome back, guys. If you're new to the series, what we do every single week is we break down a new filmmaker and talk about the general idea of what makes them great. We also look at what I consider their best movie, my favorite movie of theirs, and then an underrated one. And today we're doing Mel Brooks, and actually I decided to do this after recording my Adam McKay episode. Now my Adam McKay episode will post after this episode, but I was recording the Adam McKay episode because I'm sort of stocking up on episodes here before I move out of the house and start Old Oscar Countdown in a new place, in a new city. But I decided, I was thinking, I'm doing Adam McKay, but I haven't even done any of I wanted to do more comedy directors. That was the sort of big thing. And I was realizing that, I haven't really done any of the legends, There's Adam McKay still has a great career that's going on. His career trajectory, I think, is going up. But I didn't do any of the comedy legends. Now, I should probably start with Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton or other Marx Brothers. But I went with one, maybe maybe one that's a little further back, sort of the origin in terms of the modern day, before your Bill Murrays, before your Chevy Chases, even before your Adam Sandlers, before everybody was really Mel Brooks. And I decided that, even though I recorded the Adam McKay episode and I talked about how I should really do more comedy directors, I decided, I'll put Mel Brooks now and then I'll do Adam McKay later to start off the beginning of the comedy directors. And I've always sort of tried to stay away, or not stay away from, or stray from some of the comedy stuff, not purposefully, just because I find that they're a little bit harder to critique, because it's funny. I find MacGruber to be funny, and it's got a 2% on Rotten Tomatoes. Or no, it has a 30-40% on Rotten Tomatoes. I find, certain movies like Dirty Grandpa, which has an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, hilarious. I love Daddy's Home. These are typically sort of considered bad movies, but I think they're really funny, and I really enjoy them a lot. So it's sort of hard to say, oh, this is a good movie. Why? Oh, it made me laugh. Oh, it might not make you laugh. But Mel Brooks, I think, is undeniably has a lot of wit, a lot of charm, and I think he's definitely a talented man and a great director. And really, I said at the beginning of the top of the show, the master of the parody film. And in my opinion, nowadays, parody films don't really exist. They come around. I mean, your scary movies, your 50 Shades Darker, right? That was it. No, it wasn't. 50 Shades Darker was a real movie. 50 Shades of Black, I think, was the parody film there with Marlon Wayans. And it's like those movies, they're parody, but the thing is, the difference is that parody, you have to walk a very fine line. Those movies, if you do it wrong, they rely way too heavily on seeing the source material, and especially with movies like that where it's very singular, they rely super heavily on that, and they don't necessarily allow it just to be a fun movie. That's what I love about Mel Brooks' movie is that his two arguably best movies in Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles are both parody movies of genres that I don't love and I don't really know much about. Something like High Anxiety, I got maybe a little more in-jokes, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily as good as Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. High Anxiety is based on the Hitchcock movies, and I've seen a lot of Hitchcock movies, as you know. Go check out that episode. That was a really fun one to do. But I haven't seen a lot of Westerns, and especially the 30s monster movies. It's not something I feel compelled to go back and learn. I'm still learning about film and going back into the sort of the past, and that's really sort of the one thing that I haven't really strayed away from yet. I would say Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein are probably my top two favorite. It's hard to say because they're also funny Mel Brooks movies, but they're probably my top 5, whatever, Mel Brooks movies, top 3 Mel Brooks movies, even though I don't know the genres very well. That's because they're funny as standalone movies. There's funny, witty humor. The movies are well made. There's sort of political satire that is somewhat showing of the times, but somewhat also universal. And then just sort of zaniness and wackiness. Mel Brooks does a great job of, he has that satire in some of his movies, but some of his movies are a little more silly, a little more sort of toilet humor-esque, and the best movies is when he combines them into one. And really, I think he's just an incredible talent, because some of the trademarks of his movies is because he acts in his movies as well. For a lot of them, he's either doing supporting characters or in High Anxiety or History of the World Part 1. It's totally him. Just he's directing it, he helps write it, he produces it, and he sometimes acts in it. Sometimes he does minimum roles. Sometimes he has bigger roles. In my opinion, the less Mel Brooks acting in it, the better the movie is. Unfortunately, that's how it is, because I think he has a little more honed skill when he's just worrying about directing and finding his vision and not worrying about acting too. Sometimes it can get very overwhelming with that. And that's why I really respect a lot of actors who sometimes turn directors, or really anybody who acts in their movies, directs it, even writes it, produces it, really involved in their movie. I really respect that, but it's very hard to do. I use the example of Ben Affleck, where his first movie, he did not act in it. He did what I consider, if I were to ever do a first movie after being an actor or something else successful, it's just do what you know and then expand from there. Use it as a stepping stool. And he did it in Boston. Of course, he cast his brother in the movie, so it's very familiar in that sense. And he just stuck behind the camera, did not even do a cameo or anything, and worried about directing and the writing. And then afterwards, he did The Town and Argo, and he started appearing in his movies. But even Ben Affleck, the reason why he stepped off from Batman is says he can't be in the suit and then go behind the camera and start directing people. It's just too, it's hard. It's very much easier to be in Argo and just be in the costume of normal day, everyday clothes, and then get behind the camera and say some stuff and go in front and act. But that's why I really respect Mel Brooks, is because he's just an incredible comedian, and all of his movies are his. It's his sort of sense of humor. His brand of humor is very defined, and I really appreciate that, because the best comedians always find their voice, and I think Mel Brooks does that. Of course, he has some frequent collaborators, guys like Gene Wilder, rest in peace, and Madeline Kahn. And they're always really great in his movies. Madeline Kahn just being this interesting mix of beautiful but also weird and funny and strange, and Gene Wilder, who's just the way his comedic timing, the way he delivers his jokes, it works and blends so well with Gene Wilder, and his stuff is really incredible. But then he can work with other actors, and he work with ensemble films, which is mostly his movies, but then he can work with one or two or three characters, like something with Young Frankenstein. And I just really appreciate how he walks that fine line of parody, and it's not just parody, it's poking fun at it, but it can still sort of stand on its side. And I think the best of his movies really not only make fun of the genre and poke holes in it, but actually respect it. And what he does really smartly is he looks at genres. Spaceballs is like the Star Wars movies, but also Star Trek, and it's sort of really more sci-fi. And then, Blazing Saddles, and Frankenstein, of course, horror, and then westerns. But he doesn't necessarily focus on one movie, because then that is a lot harder. Even if it was to be like the Twilight franchise, like 2 or 3, that's a lot harder. But when you're talking about genres, you can definitely do sort of a more removed story from that and just make a comedic western and necessarily a parody western. They're parody movies in the sense that they make fun of it and they're sort of satirical, and they make jokes about the genre, but they don't solely rely on that, and that's what I love about it. And the last trademark I want to point out is just musical numbers. He's always got some weird musical number in it it's totally, the first time you watch Mel Brooks movies, they totally throw you off, but now after I started watching a lot of his movies, I'm waiting for the musical numbers, because he actually sings them, and he writes the lyrics and stuff, and that's always fun, especially in something like High Anxiety, which have this crazy thing, or History of the World Part 1 might be my favorite. Actually, I do know what my favorite, in terms of production, History of the World Part 1, but Young Frankenstein's Putting on the Ritz is so funny. I watch that clip all the time on YouTube, and we might be talking about that later on the show. So now let's move over into what I consider his best movie, Blazing Saddles. And I consider Blazing Saddles Mel Brooks' best movie, not necessarily my favorite, even though I do love it, just because I think it has the best of all his movies. Some of his movies are a little more political, have sort of that satire feel to them. Other movies have very much of a parody, sort of wackiness to it, and it has both. It has your toilet humor with the fart scenes, and then it also has sort of the biting political sort of satire in terms of the racism. That's the obvious racism that was in the time there that was never touched on really in the westerns. But it totally is right now in sort of making fun of it, right, with the black sheriff and whatnot. And so you have both of that there. You have Richard Pryor actually helped write the screenplay, and he was supposed to star in the movie. And that would have been really interesting to see, because you definitely see his sort of influence on there. And I think, for Mel Brooks movies, to me, it had to be the most consistently funny, the most sort of well-regarded, because funny is so hard to distinguish. But I think Blazing Saddles does an incredible job of that, of just stringing really funny scenes, whether it be, they're opening up the window and they see a horse and a man getting hanged at the same time, or a guy in a wheelchair, all that sort of really funny stuff. And then all the stuff with the of Gene Wilder and the sheriff and their sort of interplay. Really fun. Just lines like, you know, my name's Jim, but most people call me Jim. And, you know, funny things like that. Gene Wilder, of course, is an incredible performance. And another thing I really love is that it feels very cinematic. I think this is definitely the most accessible movie of Mel Brooks's to enter in on if you want to start off on any movie. I think Blazing Saddles, just because it's most consistently funny. It's there to make you laugh. That's one of the criticisms I would have with the movie, is that the story isn't 100% there. There really isn't a story, but it doesn't matter because you're just trying to have a really fun time with the movie. I just think that, like, oh yeah, the ending. That's right. Oh, sorry, I just thought about this, and then just the way the movie tops it off with the ending just subverts expectations really incredibly, and I love how it just, like, I totally didn't see it coming with the total. I don't want to spoil it, but the end sort of 15-20 minutes are so funny, and just a great end cap to it, which is sort of commenting on the criticisms that he's had with the producers. Now let's move over to what I consider, well, it's my favorite movie of his, which is Young Frankenstein. Now, if this were another director, Young Frankenstein would be considered the best and my favorite. I would combine the two. But I decided to go with Blazing Saddles just because I think Young Frankenstein is not as funny as Blazing Saddles, but it's better for it. But if I'm thinking about a Mel Brooks movie, I'm thinking about the funniest. People think of Mel Brooks and funny, and then of course Gene Wilder. So I think that was a mix of the two that really sort of shows that this is Mel Brooks, and even he considers one of the funniest movies of all time. But that's not why I love Young Frankenstein. Young Frankenstein is very funny. I laughed a lot during it, but it wasn't constant laughter, because this one actually has a story with heart, and you feel for these characters. You know, I really think that Gene Wilder bringing in and co-writing the screenplay really added to his character and really added to the whole story arc of the movie. That's so obvious there. And then from a technical aspect, I really think that this has an amazing technical from all around. You know, this is not just like some comedies have very poor directing, but this one definitely does not. It has incredible cinematography, using the black and white to make it feel like a 30s movie. Watching back at it now, I mean, the 70s were 40 years ago, and the 70s from the 30s were 4 years back from then. So just trying to make it feel like that, it did an incredible job at that. I mean, you could even show this movie and say, yeah, this was made in the 30s. And people would be like, oh, well, yeah, it really looks like it. The technical aspect totally nails it. The set design, the production design, the way Brooks sort of tells the story, it just gives a lot of respect to the genre. I think more than any of his other movies. The Western, I think, is more making fun of it, more parodying. I think with Young Frankenstein, he just really adores this genre, and he can make fun of it and the silliness that doesn't hold up even still today. But then he really admires the charm and the sort of ability that Frankenstein, as he likes to say, how he brings, and Igor and all this stuff, and of course Peter Boyle as the monster does an incredible job. Really funny, witty things that Mel Brooks adds, and then the incredible comedic timing from Gene Wilder, and the physical humor from Peter Boyle, even the physical humor from Gene Wilder. Oh, it's such a fun, frolicking type time. He definitely cares about the material. I mentioned that, and I really just think that this is Gene Wilder. This is the height of their relationship, and I always find myself looking at the clips from YouTube and checking them out because they're so funny. There's just these great individual moments. The story goes along really well. There's a beginning, middle, and end. You get it. You feel satisfied. I think this is just a really amazing movie, and Blazing Saddles may be the best Mel Brooks movie, but Young Frankenstein may be his best movie. Another one I was about to go for my favorite was Robin Hood Men in Tights. I really love that movie, and actually let's transition over into what I think is underrated as well. Robin Hood Men in Tights. Of course, I think Cary Elwes was born to play Robin Hood. He has just an incredible charm that he brings to this movie that is so infectious. Of course, you have Dave Chappelle with a great supporting role, and actually a couple of Disney or Family Channel stars. The dad from Wizard of Waverly Place is in the movie, and the dad from Good Luck Charlie is in the movie and plays Little John. So just interesting things like that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And a really funny movie. It has great action too, and it's different than other Mel Brooks' movies. And I think if you sort of get into his career, I think Robin Hood Men in Tights is a great one to end off with, because, or even start with if you want, because it actually makes some jokes to other Mel Brooks movies like History of the World Part 1 and Blazing Saddles. So, and that's just really fun to so he's making, it's a great end cap because it's almost like he's pointing out now, not only is he making fun of the fantasy sort of Robin Hood type genre, he's sort of making fun of a little bit of his own movies and sort of referencing them. So it's getting very meta, but I really haven't talked about Mel Brooks' acting, and he does a great job at acting. And I haven't picked History of the World Part 1 or High Anxiety, but those are both great movies. I really enjoy them both. And he's a good actor. He's a great singer. I mean, he has a overall talent, but it's his directing that I think shines over everything else that maybe gets buried, because from the whether there's the technical aspect, honing his craft from a really experienced filmmaker in Young Frankenstein, or just delivering the jokes like Blazing Saddles, or like directing great action like in Robin Hood Men in Tights. He's a great director that has covered a bunch, has them, like every movie of his is comedy, but then something, it's Spaceballs. Don't even talk about Spaceballs. You know, it's comedy sci-fi, or comedy fantasy, or comedy western, and he does just a great job at that, and even mastering the very hard horror comedy, which I love. And I think just a really great director. So I decided to do this before I go into the Adam McKay episode, because you get the starting, the foundation of the comedy. So anyways, guys, my name is Connor Rold. Make sure you like the video, comment below, let me know what your favorite Mel Brooks movie is, and for all those reasons, that's why Mel Brooks is a master of controlled chaos. My name is Connor Rold, and until next time, stay tuned.